Hi, everyone. Welcome to our live talk with Uzma Akser Coaching and Consulting and Race today. We have a special guest here, Emily Walz, Implementation Specialist and Schoolwide Trainer. We will be discussing the nuts and bolts of the zones of regulation. We will look at the core principles of the program and how it can look into a variety of settings, including school, home, and clinical practice. Today we have Emily here. Welcome, Emily, and thank you for
Thank
joining us all the way from the States.
you. Thank you. It's very nice to be here, especially during a holiday celebration week.
Yeah, absolutely. Emily is a licensed special education teacher with 15 years of teaching experience working with unique learners. And Emily has worked with elementary and middle school learners with special needs in both resource inclusion and has come to specialize in social emotional learning. In her role at the Zones of Regulation, Emily is working towards developing resources and implementing the zones school-wide. So we're really, really pleased to have you here today. And I think we should just get starting on the first question here.
Fantastic. Yeah. Thank you
Yeah.
for having me.
Oh, you're welcome, Emily. Thank you for joining us. We just want to know, Emily, the zones of regulations, what they are, and how they help children develop emotional regulation skills.
Absolutely. I am going to share my screen because the zones of regulation is a very visual methodology. And so I want to make sure that we have the visuals up here for your audience to be able to benefit
Perfect.
from. Okay, here we go. Okay, well, the zones of regulation, in its most simplest form, it gives us a way to think about, to talk about, and to take care of the feelings that we have on the inside. And it's important to know that the zones of regulation is a methodology or a framework that can be used by parents. It can be used by caregivers of all types. It can be used within a school setting and is especially useful for helping to develop emotional regulation skills for learners who have differences in regulation, who may be developing differently, and those of us who support them. That can be siblings. It can be in an inclusion setting within a school, and it works just as well for us grown-ups as it does for our children.
Thank you for
Um,
sharing that.
Yeah, well, let me just tell you about the four colors that is kind of the center of the methodology of the zones. And then I'll talk a little bit more about how it works. So when we're at the core of the zones, we're giving a language to help learners of all ages to understand their feelings better. So we start by noticing how we feel. Our body signals on the inside, our emotions, and we categorize them into four colors. Our blue zone being our lowest zone in terms of our energy, our alertness. We're often sad, sick, tired, or bored in the blue zone. And we may be just moving slowly. Our green zone is our most neutral zone. We're feeling okay, relaxed, focused. It should be said that we often do our best learning in the green zone, but it's okay to be in any of the zones within our learning environment. So the green zone is not the best zone, but it certainly feels comfortable. The yellow zone is our higher state of energy, our higher state of alertness. We might be feeling silly or wiggly in the yellow zone, or frustrated, maybe irritated, worried, and we might be starting to lose control, but we still are able to think through and process through situations. And the last is our red zone. Our red zone is our highest level of energy, our strongest feelings. And our red zone state really connects with our nervous system, with our fight, flight, or freeze responses. So we might be feeling mad or angry, out of control, terrified. And on the other hand, we might be feeling overwhelmed with a positive emotion like elation, or we might be ecstatic in this zone. And we always like to tell our learners, the red zone is not the bad zone. We just need to learn tools and strategies to help us navigate this set of feelings. I want to show you a little bit more about the core principles of the zones here. So when we're thinking about the zones, we have some key ideas that we follow. The first is that the zones are based on our feelings on the inside. They're not about our behaviors on the outside. So while we know our children backwards, forwards, and inside out, it's important that we teach them methods to be able to talk about how they feel for themselves, rather than naming it for them, if possible. I know this can take quite a while for some of our kiddos to be able to do. And in a school context, we want to be really careful that we're not using children's behavior to identify their zone. Rather, we're giving them a chance to name that for themselves. The zones is about regulating our feelings. It's not necessarily about classroom management or behavior management. It's a tool to help build the skills to take care of feelings for ourselves. We also like to say all the zones are okay. This means that we're not giving kids extra praise and points for being in the green zone, and we're not taking away points for having our more challenging feelings. We're noticing and recognizing that all of our feelings matter. They're all okay. We just want healthy tools to be able to take care of those feelings, whether they're blue, green, yellow, or red. And the last is how we teach the zones matters. So you want to think about your unique learners. What are their strengths? What are their interests? How can we use what they're already doing well at to help build these emotional regulation skills? And I just have one more visual to share with you. So as we're working through understanding our feelings and what to do about them, throughout the zones, we have a series of lessons within the Zones of Regulation curriculum. And we're learning skills that we like to call a pathway to regulation. So there's steps that learners can follow to be able to take care of their feelings. So we start by noticing, how do we feel? We think about which zone that is. And then we notice, do I need to regulate this feeling? So if I'm in the yellow zone and I'm about to go join a soccer match, my yellow zone is going to help me succeed. I don't necessarily need to regulate it, because that state is going to be useful. It helps me meet my goal. If I am in the yellow zone and I am about to take an exam at school, I may want to pause and help regulate that feeling so that I can be more successful. We teach kids to use regulation tools within the zones as a strategy. There's so many types of regulation tools. Those of you who are here are probably using many of them already with your children and with your kids at school. And so we're developing this pathway to be able to notice when it's time to use them. And then we think about, am I able to do my job? Am I able to focus or to have fun, to be able to join the group, or to be able to transition to my next thing? So this is the very basics of the zones in a nutshell. And I would love to hear a little bit more from anyone in the community, if you've heard about the zones, or if you have any other questions related to using the zones in your setting. Let me just pop.
Thank you, Emily, for sharing the visuals. That was extremely helpful to see them like that on the screen. I just want to ask you, Emily, how can parents and educators introduce the concept of the zones of regulation to children if they haven't yet?
Sure. Well, step one is just educating yourself to make sure that you have a solid foundation and understanding what the zones are and how they help learners. So this starts with the Zones of Regulation curriculum book. So our curriculum book has a lot of information for grown-ups, those of us who are supporting our kids, whether they're at home or at school. And we also have a storybook series that can be really helpful, a really helpful way to introduce some of the concepts to children at home, especially in more of a storybook fashion, which is a way that we do a lot of teaching as parents at home. But I always say starting with just using some of the language yourself. Within the zones, we're building a common language or a common way of thinking about our feelings. And so us grownups modeling and saying things like, oh, you know what? I'm really moving slow in the blue zone this morning. I need an extra cup of coffee, or I need to take a deep breath outside, or this situation is really frustrating me. I'm in the red, I'm feeling angry in the red zone. I need to step away and take a moment to regulate myself before I help you solve this problem. I am a parent of two young boys, and I know Uzma, you are too, and we both use the zones with our children at home, and then also in a professional capacity. And I can say, it has just as deep of an application at home when we're navigating the ups and downs and ins and outs of our daily life as it is within a school setting.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's great to use them because it's such a visual like tool to use at home and in a school setting that it helps not just the children but also the adults. And you mentioned like the certain language. So would you say there's a certain vocabulary that we have to familiarize ourselves with first before introducing introducing it to the children?
Absolutely. I think it's really important as grown-ups that we feel comfortable being able to talk about our feelings
Yeah,
before we expect our children to do the same.
absolutely.
And even within a school setting, that this can be a big stretch, right? As I'm a special education teacher, and I know generally as teachers, we are meant to be, cool, calm, and collected. We don't want to show our emotions. But
Mm,
as we're creating a different kind of climate where we're putting wellness and regulation first, we are actually the best models for our children to say, I am stressed in the yellow zone. And
yeah,
even us grown-ups we are working on regulation almost every moment of the day, right? Through
yeah,
our work,
yeah,
through our parenting, through our involvement with our families and our communities. And so it's really helpful that we build just the language ourselves to be able to express some of those emotions to our children, to provide a healthy model for them, and to name it, to say, I'm going to take a walk around the block to be able to take care of myself. And that sets our children up for healthy regulation strategies in the future too.
yeah. That's a really important point you've made because often parents hide their emotions, and we're always there to smile and be happy and show them that it's okay, but we actually can work on showing them sometimes it's not okay and we're feeling this way, and there are tools to manage our
Exactly.
emotions. So that's really, yeah, it's a really important point you made there. What are some of the practical tools and strategies that parents and educators can use to help identify um, and regulate their emotions? I mean, we've covered it, but what else can they do to showcase that to the children and for the children to then pick up those skills too?
Yeah. Well, number one, I think it just starts by identifying what are the things you're already doing really well. And
Mm,
maybe it's checking in with a friend. Maybe it's taking a walk. Maybe it's taking a few deep breaths or mindfulness practice. Maybe
mm,
you're a person who exercises to help take care of your wellness. And just being able to really connect the dots with our kids. I'm doing this
yeah,
because it helps me to take care of myself. I'm, I'm taking a step away because it helps me to calm myself down so that I'm not yelling at you.
yeah, yeah,
And really connecting those dots. When it comes to our kids, we want to really support them in building regulation strategies for themselves. So we start with what we call co-regulation, which is
mm,
all of the ways that we're prompting, why don't we try to change the subject, or let's use a fidget in the car, or let's use a thinking strategy. What can I do after I'm done with this task that I'm not so interested in? Um, And so we start by really supporting and prompting them to use regulation strategies. With our more emergent learners, this looks at the beginning, it looks like a lot of sensory and motor strategies. So especially for our kids that are at the beginning of their development of regulation skills, sensory strategies can be, doing anything that helps move your body. Maybe putting on noise canceling headphones to reduce noise, having something handheld, a weighted blanket, all of those, even turning the lights down is a sensory strategy. So we can start with those because that's how we support our kids at the beginning of their development. And then we move more into communication strategies and into some of our thinking strategies as well. And within the zone's curriculum, we have a lot of suggestions for regulation tools. You'll also see some of those in the storybook. And then we have a whole card deck full of tools to try cards, some for kids and some for our older teenage learners as well, as we know that they need different tools and strategies as they grow older.
Absolutely. Yeah. More challenges, I think, as they grow up and become teenagers.
Much different.
What are the common challenges now that we're talking about challenges, that you might experience when trying to regulate their emotions? And how can parents and educators support the children at this point?
I think one of the most common challenges is expecting them to be able to use a tool or strategy just the first time you introduce it.
Yeah.
Regulation is a lifelong skill, and it can take learners quite a while to build, not just to build a muscle memory for a new way of doing things. And challenging behaviors are regulation strategies. They're trying to get their needs met, whether it's through a healthy behavior or one that's not quite as healthy for them. And so the more we practice, especially when learners are in more of a calm, regulated state, practicing what it looks like to use regulation strategies for the red zone and the yellow zone for our more challenging emotions. This can look like, creating a social learning story about using a tool or strategy. This can be taking videos and remembering these are some of my tools that I can use when I'm having this difficult feeling. Role playing through scenarios. So I know for myself, one of my kids at home has a really difficult time with after school transitions. He gets home from school, he has all the wiggles, and he has a hard time transitioning to an activity outside of school that he loves to do, but the transition itself is so tough. And so creating a plan with the kiddo can be so helpful. So we do things like, wow, I really noticed yesterday when it was time you were in the red zone. What is a different thing that we can try today? So, we've tried having fidgets in the car. We've tried creating a checklist of the material, this happens to be a karate class. So the belt and the shorts and all of the supplies he needs. And so we've tried a few different strategies, and the one that we've landed on that works the best is having a schedule and checking it in the morning so he knows to predict what's happening that day. So things like that, where you don't expect it to work the first time, it's something that you're working on and supporting your child through the journey of figuring out what's going to work, and knowing that we will always have times where we are not regulating our zones well. Us grownups have challenging times with regulation, and being able to do that, the restorative piece afterwards, and to say, you know what, I was in the red zone. I really wish I wouldn't have shouted at you about XYZ. Next time, I'm going to try to take a few deep breaths and just give yourself a chance to practice and learn as well.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's so important to demonstrate that in front of our children.
Yeah.
So you've mentioned a lot of prompting and reminding to kind of build that habit for the children to remember, what zone they're in and what to do in that particular zone. I think that's so important. I think it's so important to just teach them the skills, but then constantly remind them. Because, for example, you mentioned the noise cancellation headset. Now that's quite common in our house, where my son has this, the sensory challenges, and we often forget to remind him to bring the headset to the table. That's when it's the most challenging time for him, when it's the person next to him eating, making a certain sound, or chewing on food. So I think, yeah, it's really important to remind them, prompt them, and not just them but ourselves. We need to create that habit before we instill that habit in our children. So that's really important. I like that. Thank you so much for sharing that. I have another question here. um, how can the zones be adopted? Because we're here in the UAE. I'm sure, worldwide people are using the zones. How can we adapt the zones for different age groups, and for different cultures? How would it work?
Absolutely. Well, I'll answer the second one first and then I'll come back to the other
Sure,
one.
sure.
So, in terms of adapting the zones for different cultures, um, I think one of the best and most unique parts of this particular curriculum is that it's very simple. And so as we're thinking about adapting the zones for the culture for your students and your learners, as long as we are sticking to these key principles, we are doing the zones, and that can look like using different visual systems. So if you want to make sure that your learners and that your family is represented within the visuals, it's creating your own zones visuals to be unique for you. This can be pictures of family members. This can be in a classroom setting, pictures of kids in the class, or of different staff within the school, and showing them in each of their 4 zones. It can be thinking through scenarios that are relevant for you, So, for example, this week is Eid. And I know for a lot of kids, big celebrations can be really tough to manage. And so
Yeah,
having some of those conversations about how do we take care of ourselves during celebrations, and what does that look like? What are my tools? Like your son has his noise canceling headphones that I'm sure are very helpful for large group situations. And so really thinking about how can we make sure that regulating ourselves is relevant to the context that we are in.
yeah,
And I know that school systems are the styles, and especially in special education or SEN education, varies greatly from school to school, and worldwide it's there are so many different practices within education. But I think utilizing the zones provides a neutral common language for people to talk about, for not just parents but educators at school, to be able to think about and talk about feelings in the school setting as
absolutely.
well. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So important. So important. And then what about the teenagers? Different age groups.
Oh,
That's a big
yes.
challenge in itself.
Absolutely. So I'll start with our younger kids first. So we often get asked, how much of the zones do I use with my early learners? So kids who have emergent language skills, or kids who are just getting their emotional vocabulary. Maybe you might think of younger learners, ages 4 through 6,
Yeah,
even, or some of our kids with more significant intellectual disabilities. And we talk about using the zones as a way to start building that emotional vocabulary. So really understanding what do our feelings feel like, and then thinking about, many of our kids know 3 emotions: happy, sad, mad. And how
Yeah.
can we use the zones to begin to explore some more of these emotions, such as worried, such as out of control, or feeling just bored, feeling relaxed, and adding some of those emotions in and some of those early sensory motor strategies. For our older kids, this looks a little bit different. We want to think about aging up the concepts and giving them agency over describing their feelings their own way. So here are the zones. Tell me, what does this feel like to you? Exploring more complicated and nuanced vocabulary, such as anxious, depressed is one we want to talk to our kids about, intense blue zone feeling. Thinking about what does it mean to be stressed, or how do I navigate some of these more complex feelings that I'm having as I grow older, and giving them words for them. For our older learners, this also looks like thinking about more discrete regulation strategies. So they don't want often our older learners don't want to stand out from the group. So how can we teach them ways to regulate themselves that are discrete, like our thinking strategies that they can use even as adults? And also thinking about, as our kids grow older, strategies for reaching out and connecting when they need help is really important, because they're less reliant on us grownups. And so we want them to notice, when is the time when I'm going to need extra support and help to navigate how I'm doing and my own wellness. And within the zones, we do have our tools to try cards for older learners that can help with that, for teenagers. And we also have a training that's just on adapting the zones for our adolescent learners, for our older learners, if anyone in the community is interested in joining us for that.
That's great. One question I have from there, how can you introduce the words, the terminology to the younger learners? How can they grasp the understanding that, not just happy, mad, and sad, but then you move on to the next vocabulary, to the next level? How can you demonstrate or introduce the terminology to them for them to actually grasp and understand it?
Well, a lot of this is through continuing to show them through media. So, for example, if I know a lot of my kids are struggling with the emotion worried, right? This was a big one during the pandemic with my own children, with the kids I was teaching virtually at school. And it was important that they gain a lot more experience. So we would read books that had characters that were worried, and we would notice, how do we know that they're feeling this emotion? What are the clues that we see in their face or in their body language? What are they saying? And we begin to slowly, and then we think about, what zone do we feel like worried might be in? So the zones is sort of a jumping off point for exploring that. And in a school setting, I like to think of it as creating like an emotional word wall, where we have our 4 zones, and as we're learning about new emotions, we can add them in to be able to really gain this experience. Because without the words, it's, the common phrase is name it to tame it. If we can't name how we're feeling, we can't know what to do next. And the zones is a great strategy to help do that.
Absolutely. That's great. We have, a lovely audience here. If there's any questions that you want to ask Emily, please feel free to do that. We will be taking questions. But honestly, this has been so helpful. Just to talk about the zones, introducing the concept. I have more questions. We'll wait for the audience as well, until the audience sends a question. If I can just quickly get one in as well. How can parents and educators, Emily, work together to introduce the zones and keep it consistent?
Yes. So what I like to say is if we have a common language and a common understanding, we can better support our child as they transition from one setting to another. And I know there are many parents of unique learners that are joining us, and many of our kids with differences, whether they be disability differences, physiological learning differences, they have a lot more people on their support team, right?
Yeah.
Between school, between home, between outside services. You think about occupational therapy or speech and language support. And so having a common language to use so that everybody is talking about feelings the same way is invaluable for setting our kids up for success. You can think about things like, at home, this is one way that my child really excels in talking about their feelings. You can think about common triggers. So, Uzma, your example was great. Your son has a difficult time with sounds during mealtime. This is definitely, and you have a tool that you use at home. And so knowing that you're the expert on your child, this is what works for us at home. How can we adapt that to work well in a school setting? And being able to use the same language to describe what it is. This is a trigger for a difficult feeling or zone. This is a tool that will work well. And then as then you can kind of add on to that toolbox over time. So I think that's a great way to get started. I know a lot of the students that I've taught have worked with therapists outside of school, and being able to communicate and say, these are the strategies that we're working on from a school end. How does that work with, we want to make sure that the work is connecting, because otherwise each of us is teaching this child different things in our own silo. And this common language gives us a way for the learning to carry forward throughout different settings.
Yeah. So working as a team with the therapists, the schools, family, and using the common language is so important. Yeah, I absolutely agree. It's so important to work as a team to actually make a difference. Absolutely. We'll wait for some questions to come through. But I just want to ask Emily, if you have any success stories. I'm sure you do plenty with the zones, and if you're willing to share some.
Yeah. So part of my role at the Zones of Regulation is to consult with schools and practitioners of all types to think about how they can integrate the zones into the climate or culture of their school. And I was working with a local school here in Minneapolis, and they were telling me about one of their fourth grade classes. So fourth grade is about 9 and 10-year-olds, excuse me. And so they were saying, we started using the zones. We have a lot of learners that have social, emotional, behavioral challenges within this particular school. And the fourth grade teacher was saying, one of the kids was having a really difficult time and had a big meltdown in the classroom, and the kids, the rest of the kids had to leave and sit in the hallway for a few moments. And after everybody got the support they needed, they were able to come together. And she said she was able to she was surprised at how empathetic her kids were, because they had a framework to understand what was happening. So they weren't just seeing a kid who is having bad behavior. They were seeing one of their friends having a hard time with his zone. And they were able to say, sometimes our friends are in the red zone. When this happens, they need extra support. And the best thing we can do is give them time and space to take care of their zone. And she said one of the kids raised their hand and said, because some things had been, I know that many of you have seen this, but a few things got ripped off the walls, and this happens in a school setting sometimes when some of our kids struggle with regulation. And they were able to say, we know this friend didn't mean to do what they did. When we're in the red zone, we have a really hard time thinking through. what we're doing. And so instead of having this idea of good behavior, good kid, bad kid, we have a different language to understand each other and to accept and support each other through our differences. And that is invaluable, especially as our kids are learning to grow up in more and more diverse settings.
Yeah. That's beautiful. It kind of just turns everything around to a different approach. The children and the adults are looking at this differently now with that language and how to handle emotions. That's such a beautiful story. Thank you, Emily, for sharing.
Yeah.
I really appreciate it. We've come to almost the end of our live talk. Honestly, Emily, thank you so much. We really, really appreciate it. And all the questions that you've answered today, I'm absolutely sure and certain that they're going to help many parents and educators out there. And I can say, as a parent and as a professional, that for me, the zones has been a blessing. I would like to thank you for that. It's been easier to manage myself first and then the children. So it's been great, absolutely. And thank you for your time. Really appreciate it. And we'd love to have you back soon. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you. And if you are looking to find out more information about the zones of regulation, the best way is just to hop onto our website, which is zonesofregulation.com. And you can learn about the different products for the zones, the trainings that we have, and there are some free resources for both educators and for parents and caregivers. Thank you so much for having me, especially in the evening for you and your community. And I look forward to staying in touch.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you so much. You take care and have a good day.
Thank you. You too.
Okay. Bye.